In earlier chapters, we have talked about, again, starting with one person, recruiting them, putting them in a team, putting them in the accounts department, worrying about what's going on outside the company, and now in chapter 12, we're going to start talking about how we structure the entire organisation. Now, by structuring it, I mean if you were to draw out a chart that had everybody's job included on it, who would be in which places. Now, this lends itself to lots and lots of exam questions. You get an awful lot on this area because it's a very easy topic to examine, which means it's a very easy topic to write questions for. The good news is that with a little bit of patience, because sometimes you have to read the questions carefully, with a little bit of patience, there actually isn't very much here. It's quite straightforward. So first of all, we're talking about business organisations. So it makes sense to actually talk about what an organisation is. Definition by a pair of writers called Buchanan and I think it's Huczynski. So if it's not, I apologise. So Buchanan and Huczynski, this is what an organisation is. It's a social arrangement for the controlled performance of collective goals. There you are. So I hope that's made that clearer. What that simply means is organisations are trying to achieve something. That's the collective goals bit. Everybody has to work together in order to try and achieve it. Social means it's more than one person. On my own, I am not an organisation. Technically, if I get together with my wife and we try to do something, so for example, we try and put a shelf up, technically that's an organisation. It's social because there's more than one of us. We've got a collective goal, which is to try and put a shelf up. Now, if we're going to do that, my wife will have to do most of the work because I'm rubbish and stuff like that. Controlled performance, we're going to check how we get along. Now, that's where paper F2 and paper F3 come in, particularly paper F2. Paper F2 is all about seeing how you are doing so far. So remember, the whole point behind variances is to say, how are we doing? We've got an adverse variance, it needs fixing. So companies are organisations because they're groups of people, they are there trying to achieve something, and somebody's going to check how they're getting on. Now, you don't just have to have companies, although that's the obvious one. Commercial organisations want profits. You can have what are called NFPs, not-for-profit organisations, charities, schools, hospitals. So they are still organisations, but they're not there to make any money. Public sector, government-owned. The army, things like that. That is obviously an organisation, but it's not there really to, it's certainly not there to make any money. So the government is also going to be an organisation. And cooperatives, although you don't get them very often, they are owned and controlled by people who belong to it. So in other words, that could be a good example of a cooperative is something like a group, a social group that tries to do something. You belong to a society that does something. You're in a group that does singing. You're in a choir. A choir is a cooperative. So it's going to be controlled by its members. Now, you don't really need to worry too much about those, to be perfectly honest with you. But every organisation, as soon as it's got more than one person in it, needs to be structured. And by structure, we mean we have to decide who is going to do what. So my wife and I are putting up a shelf. We have to decide who's going to hold the hammer and who's going to hold the nail. Now, based on our track record, I get to hold the nail while my wife does the hammering, because when I do it, I tend to hit her fingers. When she does it, she's actually better than I am. So we've got an organisation, we've got a structure. She's got the hammer, so she's in charge. That's what I tell her. So the organisational structure. These first four are very, very simplistic, but they are based on what researchers have found looking at lots of organisations. Most organisations are variations of one of these. So you won't find ones that look exactly like this, but you'll find ones that are similar to this. So you must learn the four of them. So we've got four different diagrams that are coming up. So we'll have to know what they are and we'll have to know what's good about them. So, entrepreneurial. Entrepreneurial, very easy. There is a boss and there is everybody that works for the boss, and that's it. All of the team, the people who work for the boss, simply do what they're told. The boss basically looks after everything. That one is very useful. It's very quick to do something. The boss decides to do it, and off the workers go and do it. The trouble is, what happens if the boss is away? The boss is ill. The boss is on holiday. The workers can't do anything because they're not allowed to do anything on their own. They've always waited for the boss. So there's a problem. Functional structures. Functional structures are basically around the idea that you have a central finance department, a central sales department, a central marketing department, or whatever the departments happen to be. The idea here is that this is cheap to run. And the reason it's cheap to run is there is only one finance department that looks after all the finance. There is only one sales department that looks after all the sales. This works very well. This is good if you have one product, or if you have products which are very similar. So there was an old exam question, not in ACCA, but in another exam syllabus, that I saw where you had a company and it made brushes and it made mops. So it made two different products, but to be honest, they are very similar. So they had one manufacturing department, one production line that made all the brushes and it made all the mops, because it was just simpler to do it like that and it was relatively cheap. So if you've only got one product, that's good. The trouble is, it's not very good if you have lots of different products. With different products, what is better is to have a divisional structure. And the reason is because this is better at looking after the needs of the customers. So what happened in the company that was in this old exam question? They made brushes and they made mops, and then they decided to start making footballs. Don't know, it was an exam question. Now, making a football is nothing like making a brush. It's not the same production, it's not the same kind of customers, it's going to go to sports shops instead of to shops that sell goods for households. Completely different. And so they were finding that having one functional structure didn't really work. What they should have done is move to a divisional structure. Division 1 will just look after the footballs. They will do all the marketing. They will do all the sales because they'll be dealing with a different product being sold to different people. They will look after all the finance for that. They'll deal with the purchases, they'll deal with the sales. Division 2 will carry on being the brushes and the mops. Now, I hope you can see there the big problem we've got with the divisional structure is we've now got 3 finance departments. We've got 3 sales departments. So the trouble is that we've now got duplication. So a divisional structure is more expensive because you've got 3 different departments doing the same thing. But it's better at looking after the customers because it can concentrate on what the people who want to buy a football, what do they want? People who want to buy a brush, what do they want? Because they probably don't want the same thing. Functional structures, one thing, so we do it cheaply. So it's very good at keeping costs down, but it's not very good at looking after customers. So in the exam, think about which one would be more appropriate, and you usually get one of those 2. They're the most common ones. Over the page, a matrix structure. Now, a matrix structure is basically trying to combine both of those last 2. So the idea behind a matrix structure is we have a head of finance who will try and keep the finance costs down. But we also have a head of Division 2. Division 2, that's the bit that makes the footballs. So the thing is, this person, the one who's in charge of Division 2, will try and coordinate everything to do with the footballs. So we'll try and make sure that our customers are really, really happy with what we're doing. The finance person will try and coordinate the brushes and the mops and the footballs to try and make sure we're not spending too much money. The problem is, what happens if I am working for finance, I'm working as an accountant, and I'm working for the footballs division? Who is my boss? And the answer is I've got two bosses. And that's not really very good. One of the things that we quite like in organisations is what's called the unitary chain of command. I've written change and I meant to write chain. There we go, the unitary chain of command. Now what that means is everybody has a single boss. I've now got two. So the matrix structure is very good because it's very flexible. You have one person who looks after all the money, head of finance, and you have one person who looks after the footballs, head of Division 2. The trouble is that you've now got all these people here. I've all got two bosses. So it's a good idea, but it's difficult to actually make it work. So those are the kind of things that we have to... You may well get those as diagrams, you may well get those as a simple story, which is the best structure. So if they make one product, if it's similar, functional. If they make lots of different products, divisional. Now, what kind of things influence how our organisation is put together? The outside world. We've already talked about the economy, political, social. That might make a difference. Are our customers, do they need a lot of looking after? Divisional might be better. Do they not need a lot of looking after? Are they all fairly similar? Functional might be better. The culture of our workers. Well, we'll talk about culture another time, so we won't worry about that yet. The span of control and the scalar chain. We're going to come and talk about those in a second. We need to think about how many managers we actually want. We need to think about, are our staff theory X or theory Y? Can we leave them to get on and do their own thing, or do they need a lot of supervision? So all of these things might make a difference to how our organisation is put together. Now, first of all, span of control. The span of control, how many people report to a single manager? So, diagram on the left, we have got a span of control of 7. The one on the right, span of control of 3. Now, it's how many people directly report to a manager. So, the one on the right, if I now add in this person's boss, there we go. What is the span of control of that person who's at the very top? And the answer is 4. There are 4 people, 1, 2, 3, 4, who directly report to that person that's circled. We're not worried about what goes on anywhere else. So the span of control is how many people actually report to you. Now, what will affect that? Geographical distribution. If people are all in the same place, it's very easy to look after a lot of them. If I've got 10 people and they all work in the same office as me, and I've got a desk that faces them, it's very easy for me to manage all 10 of them, span of control 10. But if they're spread out all around the country, then I can't look after them as much. I probably can only look after 2 or 3 of them because it takes more time. I've got to phone them up, I've got to talk about things on the phone. You know, it's just harder. So I can't look after as many people. Similarly, their ability. Good people, I can supervise more of them. People who are not as skilled, I've got to supervise less of them because I've got to spend more time with them. Their personalities. Some people like to be helped and some people like to be left alone. If they like to be left alone, I can look after more of them. The amount of support that I'm willing to give them. The amount of support that they actually need. If they don't need much help, again, I can look after a lot. If they do need a lot of help, then I can't. So all of these things make a difference. Now, notice what's happening here. What I am saying is that we should look at all of these influences and then decide what's the most appropriate number of people for a manager to supervise. We shouldn't do it backwards. What happens in lots of organisations is they decide you're going to look after 4 people. Whereas what should happen is we should decide, is 4 the best number based on everything else that we've got there? So that 4 should come at the very end of things. Now, the span of control, leads on to what's called the scalar chain. And I do apologise about all these. If you draw a diagram of all the people in the organisation, what does it look like? A tall, narrow structure means we have lots of bosses, all of them looking after only a few people. So there's lots of layers of management. Each manager only looks after a few people. That would be appropriate if people need lots of supervising. My sister used to work in a hospital, and that's what they had. Basically, they had come up with most people supervised 4 or 5 other people. So that was the span of control for virtually everybody. It was about 4 or 5 people. So you had lots of managers, lots of different levels of nurses, because obviously you want to supervise them so they're not doing anything that's potentially going to harm a patient. Whereas on the other hand, in this second diagram, in the bottom one, you've got what's called a flat structure. And a flat structure means there's very few bosses. In this example, in my diagram, there's only 2 managers. There's one at the top and there's one further down. Because there doesn't need to be any more, because each manager is supervising a lot of people. That's the sort of thing you tend to get in an accountancy college, because most of the lecturers get on and do their own thing anyway. So which one of those is best depends on the circumstances. Now, you may remember a couple of sessions ago we talked about IT, and we talked about delayering. So one of the things that IT is, it's delayered companies. It means delayering means going from that top one down to the bottom one. It means that because we use IT, we can supervise more people, and therefore we don't need as many managers. Now, that's the sort of thing that's happened. If you remember, I said one of the things that makes a difference for the span of control is geography. Now, 20 years ago, I had to phone up people around the country. Now, with emails, with mobile phones, I could have people all around the country, all around the world, and still be able to contact them just as easily. So that could be what a multinational used to look like, and maybe it's moved towards the bottom one. So, underneath that, centralisation and decentralisation. Who makes the decisions? Centralisation basically means that decisions are made by head office. Head office make the decisions, and everybody else simply does what they're told. Now, that is very appropriate in lots of circumstances. So, it's not appropriate in all. So, an alternative is decentralisation. Decentralisation is that decisions are made by people lower down the organisation. Now, as an example, if I worked for a centralised company, they would tell me what notes to use, what examples to be giving you when I'm talking to you. They would tell me what chapters to do, what order to do things in. I would just do what I'm told. Now, our organisation uses decentralisation, which means that I am allowed to make those decisions for myself. Now, that has a lot of advantages. It's faster. I get on and do what I think is best without asking anybody. I have been teaching this for years, so I know I'm the person that actually knows what's going on. I know better than my manager how to do this. My manager's never taught this paper. Because I am making the decisions, I am motivated. Because I'm the one that makes the decisions, I learn from it. I tried this bit didn't work, so I need to try something different. If I just get told to do something different by my boss, I never know why. So I don't learn, don't develop. And it frees up the strategic apex. That's the people at the top. In case you're worried, the strategic apex is the people who are at the top of the organisation. Rather than worrying about what David is teaching, they can get on and do important things, like where we're going to expand the business to. Now, there are problems, of course, with letting me do things. Duplication. If there is another F1 lecturer somewhere in the organisation, they are also doing their own notes. They're spending time doing things that I've already done. It's hard to compare people. It's difficult to compare me with another F1 lecturer because our notes are different. The order we do things in is different. There will be more training required because everybody's got to be trained in how to write the notes as well as how to deliver the material. And those two things aren't the same. Writing notes is not the same as delivering it. There will be inconsistencies. I will do something in one way, and the other F1 lecturer will do it in a different way. And you are a student, you do one course with them, you do another course with me, and we're doing different things. Which one is right? And finally, something that will become a big deal when you get up to paper P5 is what's called dysfunctional decisions. That simply means I will make a decision what's best for me, not necessarily what's best for the company. If things are made centrally, my boss will probably make a decision that's best for the company. I will make a decision that's best for me. That becomes a big deal later on in the courses. Not in F1, but later on. So are you going to have all the decisions made by people at the top, centralisation, or all of them made by people who are lower down, talking to customers, decentralisation? They're both good in different ways. So in the exam, maybe you'll have a situation where they've got a problem because they've got it wrong, or it may be they just simply ask you for a list of what's good and what's bad. Now, following on from that, we have the hierarchy of a guy called Anthony. And what Anthony talks about is he says there are basically 3 different levels inside an organisation. At the bottom, there is the operational level. This is day to day. This, I'm afraid, is me coming in, doing the teaching. This is what most accountants will be doing, processing the invoices, doing things on a regular basis. It's routine. The people at the very top, the strategic people, are thinking about fundamental decisions that affect the entire organisation. Should we expand abroad? Should we raise some finance by issuing some shares? Should we go to a bank and raise some debt? Now, you will get all of these kind of people. They will all be in the finance department. Down at the bottom, you will have the sales ledger clerks, and up at the top, you'll have the finance director. But all of these people will be inside a department. They'll all be inside a company. The key thing is to think about what they are actually doing. Down at the bottom, you do the same stuff over and over and over again. At the top, you do very different stuff, and you may only ever do it once. You may only ever make the decision to expand abroad once, and if it doesn't work, you never do it again. Now, that's going to make a big difference later on, again, in the papers, when we start talking about paper P3, and particularly P5. The stuff that you do in P5 is very much aimed at the top. The stuff that you do in F2 is very much aimed at the bottom. If you think about the stuff you're doing in F2, variances, regular, done the same way all the time. P5 will start talking about something completely different. So the idea is that we need to know who is doing the stuff at the top and who is doing the stuff at the bottom. There's got to be some kind of distinction between them because they work in completely different ways. So you may well get a worker and you're told this is the jobs that they do. Which level are they at? Strategic tends to be looking ahead. Functional tends to be looking behind. Now that moves us on to people who are referred to as stakeholders. Stakeholders are all of the people who are interested in an organisation. So all the people who are interested in an organisation. Stakeholders are very important, as one of the things we've got to try and do is we've got to try and keep these stakeholders happy. That again is something that we'll spend a long time talking about when we get up to paper P3. We've got to keep the stakeholders happy. What are businesses in business to do? What is it that they're trying to achieve? Well, you could say to me, you're trying to make profits. Well, yes, you are. But you've also got customers. You've also got employees. You need to give your employees a pay rise. You need to perhaps think about what products your customers want. Maybe they want more and they don't want to pay more. In other words, there are various things that we need to think about, and it all depends who we are referring to. And by that, all I mean is there are lots of people who actually are affected by our business. Stakeholders, i.e. is anybody who has got an interest in what we do, anybody who is affected by our business. So, internal stakeholders are staff and managers. They want things from our business. Pay, interesting work, bonuses, some of those cost the company money. Hopefully you notice with the staff, that comes back to what we were talking about with motivation. We want interesting work. With the managers, bonus comes back to motivation. So the idea is they want something from our organisation. We have to deliver it to them, or they will all leave, and then we won't have a company. Connected stakeholders are things like suppliers, customers, banks, etc. They also want something from our business. For example, we have to make sure that we pay our suppliers on time and that we pay the bank on time if we borrowed some money. If we are unable to do those, then obviously we will get taken, potentially we'll be bankrupt. So the idea is we need to keep those people happy as well. It's not just about making profits, it's about cash flow, which is something you look at in F2 and in F3. One of the most important groups that we have to keep happy is our shareholders, because obviously our shareholders are actually the owners of the company. So we need to do things that they agree with. Now, if we do our job properly, there will be capital growth, the price of the shares, the value of the shares will go up, and there'll be dividends. So we have to think about what they want. The big trouble is we've got all these different stakeholders, and we're trying to juggle what they all want. Because the problem is going to be, we'll see in a second, they don't all want the same thing. Finally, external stakeholders. We've got the government who want to make sure we don't break the law. Got the local community who are interested perhaps in jobs. We've got pressure groups, people who perhaps want us to pay our workers higher salaries, or to stop using workers in a particular country, or to stop polluting the environment, people who try and stop us doing something. And finally, if there's a regulator, there'll be various rules that we have to follow. Now, they're all wanting something from our organisation, and we have to think about how we are going to deliver it to them. So, examples. Staff versus shareholders. Every time you give your staff a pay rise, that's less money to go to the shareholders. Customers versus shareholders. Every time that you improve the quality of a product, then that's more money that's being spent, that's less profits, obviously, unless you can put the prices up as well. So the trouble is that we're trying to balance all these things, and it's difficult to do. That is incredibly important, again, when we come to P3. There's an awful lot of stuff in this second half of the course, basically from about chapter 9 onwards, that comes back again in P3 in a big way. This is very important. We have to work out who we're going to try and keep happy. Because later on, when we talk about P3, we'll have to talk about how we're going to keep them happy. We can't do that if we don't know who they are. So, stakeholder conflict. Various ways that you can try and deal with the fact that they all want different things. Sequential attention. That simply means that this year we focus on one group. So this year we're going to give our employees a pay rise. So we keep them happy. But one of the things we say to the employees is you get a big pay rise this year, but next year you don't. Because next year, what we will do is we'll focus on reducing prices to our customers. So each group, in effect, gets what they want, but maybe once every 3 or 4 years. They don't get what they want all the time. So we say to them, you want a good deal this year, but next year you sort of have to accept less. So sequential attention. Satisficing is giving people what they need, not what they want. People want more than we can deliver. So satisficing them means giving them just enough. You want a 5% pay rise, but you actually need a 2% one because of inflation. Right, you'll get a 2%, you get a 2% rise, you don't get the rest. That means we can give everybody what they need. If I give some groups what they want, other groups go without. So the idea is everybody gets what they actually need, nobody gets more than that. Satisficing works short term. After a while, people will get fed up with it. Prioritisation. It might mean that we look at who are the key stakeholders, and they always come first when we're thinking about things. Our key stakeholders are our shareholders, so we always think about them first. Everybody else goes next. So it means that our employees might not get a pay rise. Maybe they will, but we have to maintain our dividend. We have to maintain what we're giving to our shareholders. So the shareholders come first, everybody else comes next. And finally, side payments. In effect, what we're saying there is we say to the employees, we can't give you a pay rise. What we will do is instead we will improve your working hours. So we won't give you a pay rise, but we'll give you won't have to work as long. So you do a 40-hour week, next year no pay rise, but you only do a 39-hour week. So in other words, I'm compromising. Instead of giving you what you want, I'll give you something else. So these are all ways that you might decide to manage things. Now, if any of you have got families, which I'm sure all of you have, that's in effect what you do. Members of your family, particularly if you've got children, they don't all want the same thing. So sometimes one of your children gets what they want and the other one has to put up with it. Sometimes they both get what they need and neither of them gets what they actually want. Sometimes there will be somebody, perhaps if somebody's ill for a week or two, they come first all the time. And side payments, in effect, you bribe them. So you say, Mum, you're not getting this, but I'll give you something else instead. So any of you with children will recognise that. The final thing that we've got in this particular section starts talking about what's called the informal organisation. Now, everything we've seen so far, the structure, is all to do with what's called the formal organisation. The formal organisation, it's called that because you can write it down on a bit of paper. You can say, here is David, here is David's manager, here is that person's manager, here's another department. Everything can be written down on a bit of paper. The informal organisation is what you can't write down on a piece of paper. It's the things that also go on inside an organisation. It's the way that things are done. So it's not what jobs people do, it's the way that they do them. Now, informal organisations are very, very important, particularly when we start talking about change. And that, again, is something that we look at in a lot of detail in P3. We're going to talk about culture in the next chapter. So the formal organisation, the structure of an organisation, is who does what job. And the key thing behind structure, every job gets done once. If the job gets missed out entirely, then you may have a problem. If the job gets done twice, then you're wasting money. So everything gets done once. It's also about communicating. How do I know that the job has been done? Who tells me? Who do I tell to do the job? And how do I know that it's been done? So structure is all to do with who's doing the task and who tells them to do it. How do they find out it's been done? So it's all written down. I can tell you what to do, you report to me. Do you remember all the stuff we're doing about authority, power? It's all to do with this stuff again. So that's the formal organisation. In the next chapter, we'll talk about culture, which is the informal organisation.